You're listening to Real and Raw Adoptee Talks with Emma Greenslade.
Good morning, and hello wherever you are in the world. Today we are talking with Lottie, and Lottie is an adoptee, a mum, a wife, a sister, a daughter, an IT professional who's now turned to being a coach, and she's also a retiree. So Lottie will be talking to us today about her difficult adoption and how she survived and learned to live a different life by letting go. So welcome to the show, Lottie. I'm delighted to have you here this morning.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure. So you're listening to Emma Greenslade of Real and Raw Adoptee Talks. And if you would like to be on my show, then please do get in contact. You can see in the show notes how to get in contact with me, and we will go from there. So today, as I said, Lottie's going to be talking to us about her adoption. And so, Lottie, do you know much about how and why you were adopted?
Yes, I do. So I guess we're going to start right at the very beginning. I didn't know, obviously, for a while, but I always grew up, quite strangely maybe for some, I had an adoption day. So every year, rather than just having a birthday, I had an adoption day. So there was never any secret in my adopted family that I was adopted. And in fact, I am actually half Indian, so I obviously have a different tone of skin, rather beautiful tone of skin. But anyway, so yes, I think it was never a secret. It was always openly discussed. But I didn't really know very much. I just literally had a birth certificate that had my adopted parents' name on. And when I got a little bit older, I found that. And really, I didn't probably ask many questions, but I think I grew up just thinking, why am I a different colour? You know, why is my mum and dad different? And just for the background, my mum and dad already had 4 children, biological children. My dad was a vicar. So the real story that they told me, and it was verified, was I think at birth, my birth mother, I'm going to get in a muddle with my mother's, but my birth mother obviously gave birth to me, and she, I was told, kept me for 5 or 6 weeks. She did have an Indian boyfriend who was studying, and from what I was told, they had quite a long relationship. She fell pregnant and had me, and I lived with her and my grandmother to start with. My Indian father wasn't really, I think he came to visit, but he wasn't a huge part of our lives. And then sadly, at 5 or 6 weeks, my mother, who lived in the north of England, didn't have much money, couldn't really cope, and decided to give me up for adoption. So the other half of the story is my adopted dad, one day as a vicar, used to work in children's homes, and he came to a children's home. Now, there's a bit of a gap here, because actually, by the time he arrived, I'd been in the children's home for 2.5 years. So I'd sat in the corner. I was told I used to sit on the sofa and rock. And strangely, for some of my family and friends now, I used to sit in silence and never speak, and sat there rocking, really, in a world of my own. So my adopted father, as a vicar, did his rounds and came in and saw, I think the photo I've given you is almost on that that first few weeks. He saw the little quiet Indian girl rocking quietly. I was told he fell in love with me quite quickly, and because my adopted mum sadly had 3 or 4 miscarriages, there was quite a bit of a gap. So I think my older sister is 9 or 10 years old. So I think he and my adopted mum wanted to kind of fill that gap, have another baby in the family. So that's really how I was found and how I was taken into a white family in the north of England. So obviously all the paperwork was done legally, and I arrived, I think, 2.5 years back in 1967, I think it would have been. And I was taken into a family, into a big vicarage, people who know churches and things. So I vaguely remember some of it, but obviously it's always that thing. Do I remember or was I told? But basically, I do remember living in this big cold house, and at first I kind of thought it was another children's home because there were so many children. But that was really how I came about being adopted, and sort of why. And then, very strangely though, I think two years later, my adopted mum fell pregnant biologically, and I ended up then having a little brother, Daniel. And so, strangely for me, I was kind of sandwiched between four older children, myself as the adoptee, and then another biological son. So that was really how it and why I ended up being adopted.
So on your adoption day, do you remember what sort of thing you used to do?
Well, it was a bit of a strange thing because it has come out later in life, but I mean, they used to kind of, I think there was a set time, if I remember correctly, I don't know, something like 3:10 or something crazy. And I think it was the time when the adoption papers were signed. And I did find out in later years that actually each of my older brothers and sisters on the dreaded adoption day had, and I say dreaded because again, there's two sides, but they went to court and they were asked by the judge, and obviously nowadays it wouldn't happen, but they obviously were asked about what they thought of Lottie and were they happy about this new child coming in and everything. So on my adoption day, we kind of relived that. And it is odd because my brothers and sisters, thought it was nice by remembering how they'd welcome me into the family. But on the other side, I think it was just some of the beginnings of me just feeling again different and being reminded every year that actually, I wasn't a biological child. I was adopted. So yes, I think at 3:10 or whatever it was, we used to all say, yes, are we pleased we've adopted? How lucky we are having her. And oddly, though, I never really used to speak. So I didn't sort of revert and say how lucky I felt. And it went on for years. It did go on for years. And even now, I mean, I'm 58 now. Even on the adoption day now, my brothers and sisters still send me happy adoption day messages. And a couple of years ago, I did say, can we please stop this? Because it does just remind me that I am always kind of the extra in the family. And I think one or two of my brothers and sisters got it, but the others still carry on with it. So yes, the adoption day still exists.
Yeah, we had an adoption day when I was growing up as well. And
Oh,
I
nice.
don't particularly remember it, but my sister was telling me about it a couple of years ago. And I do remember having a celebration that wasn't Christmas. It was in the summer. And having looked at my court documents, I was, it was official in the summer. So that actually then made sense because we all have birthdays in the winter, and mine's in December. So, you can understand that it was dark and what have you, but this was always light. And, it was just a gift exchange or maybe a piece of jewelry and a piece of cake and stuff like that. But I don't think it was called an adoption day. I'd have to ask my parents what they called it.
Oh, how nice, because I've never heard anyone else who has an adoption day. So it's quite nice to hear that others have it. And how did you feel about your adoption day, though? Was it a positive day or?
Unfortunately, I don't remember a lot of my childhood.
Okay.
Because I remember it being in the summer and it being a celebration, I would think that it was a happy day, but maybe because it was an adoption day, like you, it reminded me that I wasn't biologically part of the family. I was the extra part.
Yeah, and that is how I felt. It was like Lottie's adoption day, and I was like, oh, here we go again. But it took me quite a long time to realise that I started dreading the day because it made me feel different. So, but anyway, I think again, it's one of those things. There's always two sides, and I think that's what it taught me early on. That actually, now I have got older and I've talked to my older sisters and brothers, they think it's a really great day, and it was only when I found out quite recently that they did have to go to court and they felt it was great that they were part of it. But it was an interesting one because, again, as the adoptee, you're not really part of it. You're passed around from pillar to post. But again, when we talked about that in latter years, the two halves now kind of gel together a bit better. But yes, but no, there was no presents and no cake. It was this strange kind of ceremony of, almost, are we still happy we have we've adopted Lottie or not? But anyway, yes, it still goes on today. So happy Adoption Day to anyone who has an adoption day today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you've got an adoption day, we'd love to know about them. And what did you do on your adoption day? So you grew up in a big house, but being part of, the Vickers family, did that mean then that you stayed in one place, or you then moved around the country into different big houses, vicarages?
Well, I think when we go through my childhood, it gets a bit complicated. So I think the early part of my childhood, I think we moved 1 or 2 times, but yes, we did move because my dad moved every 2 or 3 years. And I don't remember, because I was 2.5, and then obviously 4 and 5 or whatever. So part of my childhood, I don't remember a lot, but I do just remember in big houses, big cold houses, I have to be honest, and vicarages, and actually, I guess for once, just in a family, see how a family operated, sharing rooms with people, and my little family then up in the north of England didn't have much money, but I do remember that time quite calm with no chaos or anything. We had a little dog in the garden. We used to play, and it was relatively normal for that early part. But yes, I guess moving on, if we want, about my actual childhood. Sadly, then at the age of 7, that was one of the most strangest parts of my life, because up until then I'd say my life was relatively static, and I'd use the word safe actually. Still very quiet. I didn't really speak very much then, but sadly at the age of 7, with my older brothers and sisters are mostly out of the picture, by the way, because they're 9, 10 and 12, 14 years older. So there was always 2 halves of the family, and there was always my adopted mother, myself, and my little brother. So on this dreaded day, we got the big family red VW camper van, if I remember correctly, whatever van it was. And we very rarely went anything. So it's quite a great excitement, because my mother gave me obviously lots of chores to do. And for once I thought, oh, we're actually going somewhere. And it's quite odd because I never actually left the house, really. I kind of went to school, but I had a very closed, insular life, and obviously I knew no difference. Anyway, off we went. It was August, it was sunny, and my mother had packed some nice fish paste sandwiches, all these kind of things. And I was like, oh, and buckets and spades, and I think more or less, probably it wasn't the first time, but I guess with the events that then happened, it became set in my mind. So off we went, and it was a very long drive. We went somewhere I think into Wales or whatever. I'm off. It took a long time. Sadly, my adopted dad was very tired. He'd been working a lot, and my mum was a little stressed and everything. But off we set, and it is one of those little family moments that I do treasure in some ways. And obviously the 4 of us, which I thought, quite nice. And as an adoptee, I don't know about people, but you kind of think, oh, this is quite normal. Great, we're going to have a normal day out, whatever it is. Off we went. But sadly, yes, the day changed quite rapidly. So we got near to where we were going. My mum asked my dad to pull in near a beach, and my little brother and I were excited to see the sand. So we pulled in, parked the lovely van up, and my mum said, look, I'm going to get some, little bits of food and milk and things. And then she said, Lottie, right, you've got to look after Daniel, make sure dad has some rest. And my dad went onto the beach, typical in those days, rolled his trousers up, put his little handkerchief on his head, if I remember correctly, and really just sat on a deck chair and more or less went to sleep. And then, little finger pointed at me from my mum, don't disturb dad. I'll be back in, 20 minutes or so. Keep an eye on your little brother. And that was really the theme, actually. So I was used to it. Off she went, and we built sandcastles and were quiet and all the rest of it. But then kind of all hell broke loose, because my mum came back and she went to prod my dad. And without me realising, my dad had a mini stroke on the beach. But I obviously was only 7 and obviously wasn't aware, and was under strict orders not to speak to dad. So, I mean, it was horrific. I've got to be honest. I didn't, I went from being this quiet little child building sandcastles. I was literally looking up, thinking, "Oh my goodness," And before I knew it, my mum was rushing around. She knew what to do. She was yelling at me, saying, "Why weren't you keeping an eye on Dad?" And as that little child, almost like in the headlights, I was thinking, "Wait a minute, I wasn't meant to be talking to Dad, and I did my job. I looked after Daniel. What have I done wrong?" Sort of thing. And I guess part of the theme, maybe as an adoptee, was kind of to disappear in the background, do what I was told, not cause any grief, because I was meant to be happy and grateful for this family looking after me. So in my head, I'm thinking, "Oh no, I've done what I was told." And obviously I didn't really understand the severity of what was happening. So I think, if I remember correctly, I think my mum I think she went and called on one of my older sisters, actually, because obviously my mum had to go with Dad, but obviously they were all a long way away. So there was a lot of commotion and kind of whatever. I remember sitting on the wall with my brother, kind of just looking at the sea. And I do remember, and it is interesting because I have an affinity with the sea more or less from this moment, I think, just looking at the sea and kind of transporting myself away from all this noise and chaos, partly because I didn't understand it. But in the background, and obviously an ambulance was arriving. I think some little old lady who we didn't know came and looked after my brother and I, as my mother had to go with my dad. And off he went to hospital. And we then went, if I remember correctly, to a caravan. We were renting a caravan, if I remember correctly. I think for some reason we were going to a caravan, and then we were going to do an exchange in the vicarage, because vicars always did an exchange. But a couple of days, I remember, in the pouring rain, beating on the roof. Eventually, I think one of my older sisters did arrive to look after us while my mum was obviously in the hospital with Dad. And really, my life changed then. We had a horrific 2 weeks. My dad didn't really come home. We then had this holiday, and I remember in the caravan with the beating rain, eventually then moving to this another cold vicarage. I did sort of think, are the only houses in the world cold vicarages? And this was meant, I had this dream of a wonderful holiday, building sandcastles, but none of that materialised. My sisters obviously came down, obviously were looking after us and helping Mum. And sadly, we finished the holiday and went home without Dad. And sadly, I think, I can't remember the dates, but sadly, a week or so later, my mum got the phone call in the middle of the night to say that Dad had passed away. So it's very vivid, all of that, because that is when my life changed totally. And again, it's very interesting because there's obviously 7 versions of this, my mother's included, and obviously 6 brothers and sisters. But anyway, obviously Dad died, and I guess the horrific thing is we had to move out of our home. So as a vicar, if you've got no vicar anymore, you have to move.
Yeah,
quite a poor family. So my mum obviously now had more or less 6 kids. I think my older brothers and sisters were kind of at uni or finishing uni, but there was not much of an income anywhere. And obviously now Dad had died, and I think, if I remember correctly, he was only like 42 or very young.
Wow, so young.
I might have got the years wrong. Sorry, no, he might have been 54, but still quite young.
Yeah.
And obviously leaving a wife who, in those days, my mum lived in the kitchen, really, and she didn't know anything about finance. She didn't know anything about how to manage life. And so my mum was 42, and I think my dad must have been 47 or something. But and it was probably by then 72 or something. So a really difficult time. So out of the vicarage. And I remember I was kind of always on the edge. And again, maybe as an adoptee, you're kind of never quite in the centre unless it's adoption day. But I was kind of on the edge thinking, my goodness, I'm going back to the children's home now. Because I kind of already at that moment knew that Dad had really chosen me. So my biggest fear was, oh my goodness, I'm going to go back. How's this going to all work out? And I kind of just, and I guess it's the beginning of me kind of disappearing. And I hate to say, I almost ceased to exist. And what I mean by that was we did move. And my mum then unfortunately started drinking. She suffered from depression. And in those days, you didn't get any help. There was no grief counselling then or anyone coming round. So we moved, and my brothers and sisters kind of helped move, but then they all kind of disappeared. So I was left at home. I was registered at a school, but with my mother sadly drinking and most days lying on the floor drunk, and me then having to look after her and run the house. By then I was 7 or 8. My little brother, I think by then, was 4. So really, again, I went into myself again. I was stuck at home. almost trying to hide, no one really bothering or caring if I went to school. If I did go to school, I just remember this horrific walk the mornings I went, actually, and it was across some marshland, and it was dark and misty, and I used to have to walk across this by myself, absolutely petrified, no dinner money, nothing in my satchel. I used to get to school looking, obviously, I don't know what it looked like. But again, as an adoptee, I kind of disappeared into the background, made up excuses, made up stories, all the rest of it. And then obviously at 4 o'clock, whatever, I'd wander back in the dark. And it was sad, I think, is the word. My brothers and sisters were busy studying and having their life. And I used to go home, and then, I used to worry, would my mum be in? Would she be on the floor? Where would Daniel be? Whatever it was. And my life was that, really. And again, you don't know anything different, to be honest. So I got on with it. I cooked and washed and cleaned and did everything my mum said. Unfortunately, she got violent towards me and abused me physically and everything. And I would just kind of fall into bed in the cold, exhausted, and just really wishing I didn't exist. And thoughts of my kind of children's home came back, and I started wishing I hadn't been adopted and all these kind of things. And I guess then you start asking, why me? This family's meant to have chosen me. And yet now I'm obviously my dad was a vicar, so we were quite religious. But I then started thinking, yeah, yikes, if God's got all this in for me, he must be a funny kind of guy. But that was my life, basically. And then sadly, a couple of years passed by, but when my brothers and sisters used to come and visit, my mum would put on this great show. The dress would come on, cakes would appear that I'd never seen, and we'd put on this great show. And I used to think, wow, and then as soon as I used to go on a Sunday afternoon, back I was, mum was drinking cider or whatever was in the kitchen and boiling eggs. Those are my childhood memories. And I was doing everything else. And it was bizarre, actually, because it was never discussed. We never talked about me obviously being painfully thin by then. I remember at school taking my clothes off and my pants fell down and everything. And I obviously had marks on me and everything. But no one said anything. And I guess that was the sad time of the times that, there was no one really to help. And I guess that was the thing. And I kind of just sat quietly each day back to my rocking again when I could. I used to rock in bed, and sadly that used to really annoy my mum. So she used to come in at night and hit me really quite viciously. And, and sadly, I haven't really gone back to these thoughts for quite a while, but she did take out all her anger and all her grief and all her unfairness of the world on me. And I used to just lie there quietly. Oddly, someone said to me a while ago, even my own daughter, well, Mum, why didn't you retaliate? I said, wait a minute, you don't go and hit somebody, and even if they're hitting you. But I think those are my darkest moments of that early childhood anyway. And then, I don't know, shall we continue to when things changed again? Shall we go there?
Well, I think we'll just take a beat there, actually, because that was a real, thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I can sense it was a really difficult time to comprehend as a child. And like you say, God is a funny kind of guy. And why is it that we've been led down this path of difficulty and struggle, and the world doesn't seem a very safe place when you've got these adults that are abusing you, and there's no confidant around to share that with, and none of the, I don't know if you had school friends, if you went round to their house, and if they...
Oh, no, definitely not.
And how challenging that must have been. You must have felt really alone.
Yeah, it's back to the abandonment, really, of an adoptee. And sadly for me, it was, I guess I also had the abandonment at the birth. And for a lot of us, that's bad enough. But I guess then when my dad died, I kind of felt abandoned again, because I kind of thought he was the one who chose me. I was told continually he chose me. But then I guess, again, and it is a theme, I felt abandoned hugely by my brothers and sisters, because I'm thinking, hey, crikey, you lot, where are you guys? you know, and especially sometimes when I have got older and I've got a daughter of my own, you look back and you think, where were you guys? Because
Yeah.
they almost, but again, you know, with hindsight, you know, they were, I think, if I remember correctly, 16, 18, 21 and 23. So they were all their different age stages of studying whatever. And like anyone, you know, all of us, you know, at that age, the first thing you want to do is escape. And they were escaping and studying and all the rest of it. And also, I mean, we have talked about it as a family, but it's been very tricky. Because when they used to come and visit on a Sunday, Mum was great. You know, Mum was how she was when Dad was alive. The lippy was on, the hair was done, even a dress was on. But they never saw that, and it was only years later. I mean, without jumping forward, but yeah, when I don't know, when I first of all, and going back to Friends, by the way, I never said anything. I was mortified, you know. And the moment when I was weighed in I think I had knitted pants, and they fell down because I was so thin, you know. And I think it was those moments where I thought, oh, actually, no, things are a bit different here for me. And obviously, when I grew up, I was more or less the only, you know, darker brown child, and I was called Blackie at school. I mean, I wasn't black, obviously, but you know, in those days it was quite odd. But I guess as you know, it made me kind of shrink, and you do question it. But I think looking back now older, you know, it taught me actually just patience, sit it out. How, you know, just I can't do anything about it now, and I to this day live by this. You know, what can I do today? Well, actually, I can just survive. You know, I can put a smile on it. I can go to school, and I can. And I used to beg to my mom to say, "Mom," but I think she was afraid I was going to talk to people. And back to the friends. I mean, I never dared go somewhere because, glory be, I was going to have to invite them back. And what would that look like? So no one ever came. No one ever came to my house. And the only little friend I had was my next door neighbour, and this was again in the north of England. And I think, you know, my mum used to shove me out on a Saturday after all my chores were done. I'd want to go back to bed, but no, couldn't go back to bed. And I used to have to go out from 9 till 6, I think, whatever the weather, whatever the season. And I think there was a little girl in the same street, and we did become friends. And in fact, to this day, we are still friends. But again, I never said a word. You know, I hid everything. I put on this kind of front. I did go in a house, and I was like fascinated because, you know, there was blankets on beds. It was clean. There was food, and everybody seemed to be happy. And yeah, and there was a television, if I remember correctly. You know, all these things that we didn't sort of have. And I kind of asked, I think one evening, I remember profusely when we'd been playing outside, you know, and I said, "Oh, what are you going to do when you go back in?" Knowing what I was going to have to do and possibly what would happen. And she said, "Oh, we're going to sit by the telly, we're going to have ice cream." And I was like, wow. But again, those are the beginnings when, you know, as an adoptee, we've always felt different. But I started then thinking, things are very different. And again, back to, you know, how I managed that. And it was more about just being patient, can't do anything about it. And to this day, I live by the motto almost. I've got a roof over my head. I've got some food. At the moment, that was about all I did have. And when things are low now, I still think, oh, no, roof over my head, enough food, because everything else was really surplus. So I think, you know, when I've tied in those difficult times, I have looked now at what I've kind of been, I learned them without realizing. But yes, no, it was, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously only touching on it slightly here. I don't want to scare the listeners too much, but yeah, I mean, it was my bleakest time. I mean, we had a coal bunker. I used to have to almost spend time in the coal bunker alone in the dark, not knowing when I was going to come out. So today I have a fear of the dark. And food, I mean, you know, food and warmth. You know, I didn't know if I was going to have any food, and if there wasn't much food, then obviously I used to give it to my little brother. And coming home and finding my mum, you know, just on the floor, you know, when an adult should be looking after you, and I ended up having to look after her. But you know, it gives you skills and things for later on in life that you don't quite know when you're going to need them. So that was really how I coped, almost without realizing.
Yeah, and you learnt resilience on a big scale.
Without realizing it. So that's also a message. You know, you don't know whatever you're going through, you don't know what you're learning, and you don't know when that's actually oddly going to help you in the future. So I think that's the message also that I would like people to realise. And the reason I'm talking today, if someone is in these dark moments, you aren't alone. Even when I was in the coal bunker, in the dark, at sometimes whatever time, not knowing when I was coming out, not knowing even if anyone was going to come and rescue me, I learned patience. I've got to be honest. I learned patience. I thought, no, I can wait. And it does come with that roof over the head, and really being alone. And again, I'm lucky. I've been married a long time. I've got a daughter and all the rest of it. But actually, we are alone in the world, whatever we are. And we have to realise that is okay. And we are okay being alone. So those little moments sometimes come back to me. I think when I'm in the dark, sometimes now I'm thinking, oh no, it's dark, and I do like a little chink of light somewhere.
Do you?
Yes, I do. And I don't like the dark, and I don't like the cold, because obviously, I grew up being cold, and I do, oddly, even if I've only got a bit of milk in the fridge, I don't like an empty fridge because it takes me back to kind of being out of control, not knowing when you're coming out to daylight or when you're going to have something to eat. So it's quite odd at 58. If I say to my husband, oh, there's nothing in the fridge, he kind of knows, oh my goodness, no, she feels unsafe, there's nothing in the fridge. And if it's too dark, he'll say, oh no, we'll leave the door open. And yes, so those little moments still haunt you, but you can overcome them, is the message. Yeah,
definitely. It is. The message is that you're capable of overcoming anything.
Yes, and it is in your head, isn't it? I think that's the thing to remember. We often look at the physical surroundings, but I have learned to take myself away from those physical surroundings quite often, and patience. I think, I wouldn't have thought I was a patient person. And someone said to me the other day, oh, you're so patient, where'd you get that from? And I obviously didn't go through the whole story, but yeah, I do believe it goes back to then, just patiently waiting, knowing that things will change, really. They might not change for the better, hence my dad dying, whatever, but they may change, but they'll change, and they will change. Everything is temporary, and I do believe that.
Definitely. And so perhaps now would be a good time to start talking about how you began making these changes, because obviously you had this really difficult childhood. We haven't touched on what happened in your teenage years and how you got out of the house.
Okay.
So perhaps we should fill that gap of from this really dark childhood and difficult childhood, and just kind of surviving. What happened next?
Well, this is
a really big part of your life.
Well, this is the most important bit, and we've taken a while to get here, but never mind. So again, if you can imagine this scrawny little dark little child living almost in a hovel, I guess is the only way. No one really knew my existence. No one at school checked I was going every day. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't really know when it's coming. So one day, I think, I can't remember, it was September, something like, I would have been, I think, 9. So I'm 73 or something, 74. So, a couple of years after Dad had died, and obviously we'd had a couple of years of all of this. But actually one day I did come down, and my mother was there looking quite perky, and I was like, oh, this is different. I was a bit nervous, knowing that the last time I kind of felt this, we were going in the van, and I obviously knew how that had panned out. So she did say, you and I, Lottie, are going out for the day. And I did think, going out? I was like, it's a bit like today going out. I was like, really? And obviously she said, yes, got to do all your things and everything. And I'm thinking, what about Daniel? No, don't worry about any of that. And I was thinking, has she been drinking, whatever? And she then said, no, none of that. She showed me, if I remember correctly, it was a little blue dress that one of my older sisters had. And this was laid out. And I don't think I'd even worn a dress, apart from second-hand or third-hand school uniform. I actually didn't have any of my own clothes because I didn't really go anywhere. And she gave me a pair of shoes to my sister. And I was thinking, wow, we really are going out. And I think my only vision, and my friends laugh now, is I'm thinking we're going out for tea. Maybe we're going to have cake. I still have an obsession with cake now. And I thought, and I don't know. And I was always, again, maybe as an adoptee, I was so filled with warmth, almost thinking my mum's going to spend some time with me at last. We're going to have this kind of mum and daughtery time. Anyway, We're going to go on a train. I was thinking a train. I'd read about all of that. And she said, right, we're going to go on a train. So anyway, off we went, and we'll speed up a little here. So we went on a train, and then oddly on this train, I always had no idea where we were going. I didn't know where we lived, to be honest, let alone where we were going. And then she said, right, I need to have a talk, Lottie. And I said, oh, okay, fine. And she said, right, we're going to go and visit someone. And I'm thinking, maybe we're going to visit some aunties, because I knew that the friends at school went to tea with aunties and uncles and visited family. Or I thought, maybe we're going to go and see one of my brothers and sisters. I just thought, we're going to visit people. I thought, wow, this would be great. But I got this long lecture. No, you only speak when you're spoken to. If you're not sure about a question, you look at me and I will answer it for you. And I'm saying, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. So obviously I had a grilling for about a couple of hours. And obviously we were quite a long way now away from home, but I thought, well, I don't really care. So we obviously got off the train, and my mother dragged me, I think, through London and onto tubes, all these things I kind of read about, but I didn't quite know where we were going. And I could see different countryside going by and things changing. I'm thinking, crikey, we are going a long way here. And then I was worried for Daniel and with all my chores and what time we get back and all these kind of childhood things. Anyway, we arrived. So we actually got a taxi. I mean, my mum splashed out on a taxi, and I was like, wow. And it was in the middle of nowhere, and we went up these little steps, and my mum rang the bell. And I was kind of hiding now, because I was thinking, oh my goodness, is this another children's home? That was really my thought by now, because I thought another big house, looks quite old, definitely looks cold. So this old lady opened the door with grey hair and wearing, actually, I remember it vividly, a black skirt and nice little pink top. Makeup was on. I thought, oh, and I looked at my mum quickly. And I thought, oh, yes, actually, she's got makeup on too, things I didn't really notice. So when we go into this plush lounge with lights and a fire and a telly, all the things I kind of kept looking at everywhere. And then great biscuits and cake arrived. And I do remember my mum kind of looked at me with the evil eye, and I thought, no, Lottie, sit on your hands, no wolfing down the biscuits or the cake. You've obviously got to behave. And my mum said, whatever you're offered, she said, if I eat, you eat. So I kind of got this 2-hour grilling, and I thought, right, okay. And I was thinking, no, mum's not eating because she's talking, and my stomach was rumbling. Because by now it's quite late, and obviously I think my mum had taken some horrible fish paste sandwiches again or something. But for some reason, I hadn't eaten any. I can't remember. So I was out, and by now it's about 3 or 4 o'clock, I think. And it was kind of going dusk, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm hungry. Anyway, nice lady chatted, and then she said, okay then, Lottie, we're going to have a little chat. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. We had a little chat, and she asked me about my school, and my mum had said, and she grilled me about school. This is what you're learning maths and English. And I was thinking, oh, really? I might. But anyway, I guess again, as an adoptee, I want to make sure my mum was happy with me, and I didn't have any beatings at the end of the day. So I was half torn between thinking, is this a way out? Because I was thinking, oh, I am out, but I was thinking, no, my mum, is the queen bee here. So anyway, that all happened. Obviously, I then sit in the corner again quietly, and there's a little quiet whispering and chit chat going, and all the rest of it. And no one else really appeared. But anyway, my mum suddenly stood up, and she kind of dusted down her cloak, put her coat on, picked up her bag, and I kind of stood up. And I thought, okay, that's it, fine. And then she there was no touching in my family, so there was no touching whatsoever. And she kind of did a nervous little wave. And then she said, okay, Lottie, I'll see you in December. And I was thinking, I was 9. I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure it's only September. I mean, what's happening here? So I think the kind lady said, say goodbye to your mother. Do you want to give her a kiss? And I was like, woof, I've never really kissed my mother in my life, and she definitely hasn't kissed me. And so we kind of had this uncomfortable whatever. And with that, my mom kind of went. So I then was left in this room, thinking, what's going on here? So the kind lady comes back again. And then she said, Lottie, you did really well and everything. I'll show you to your little room, and you can go to sleep here. And tomorrow, some other people will be arriving. And I was thinking, okay, this is getting more and more strange. I think it's too plush for a children's home. I thought there is heating, there is food. That looks quite good. So I went up this rickety staircase, and there was like 3 beds, and I had nothing with me, by the way. I mean,
Well, I was thinking,
nothing.
did you have a suitcase?
No, nothing. I had literally nothing. In the bathroom, there was a toothbrush and a toothpaste, but I had no change of clothes. And I think the kind lady just said, "Don't worry, all that will be arriving tomorrow." And I was thinking, okay, we don't know what's arriving. Really, I had no idea. And again, I think obviously she said, "Oh, come down and have some dinner. There'll be a nice little lady to meet you for some dinner." Oh, great, we're getting some food here. I don't care about anything else.
Yeah.
So I went downstairs, met this little lady wearing kind of a house coat, had this strange kind of supper together, more or less. And she asked me a few questions, again about school and my brothers and sisters and where we lived. Didn't really know where we lived. And I think she must have thought, what a weird child. She knows literally nothing. And then she said, "Right, I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. So I'm thinking, oh, okay. So I then thought, I'm going to have to find out a little of what's going on here. This is crazy. So I said, okay, then. I said, at 8 o'clock, I said, will I be doing the cleaning? Because then I thought, I'm going to be the cleaner. I thought, that's what it is. I'm going to be the cleaner, and maybe she's going to give me some education in return. So I said, will I be cleaning? Have you got all the cleaning things I'm going to need? And I said, will there be other girls then coming to help me do the cleaning? So this wonderful woman called Claude, in fact, and she kind of looked at me as if I'd gone crazy. And she said, "Lottie, what on earth are you talking about?" She said, "This is a boarding school." She said, "You're going to stay here till Christmas. The other girls are arriving tomorrow with their trunks and all these other kind of things. You've arrived early because you are obviously a clergy orphan." I was like, whoa, this sounds a great name, because my dad was a vicar. This was a church school. So she said, "You're here for free." And then she said, "The other girls are arriving tomorrow because we couldn't do your little interview and your exam because of your educational situation," I think was the word used. She said, "That's why you came early today. You live a long way away." So she said, "That's why Mum and the lady were talking." So she said, no, just said, "Don't worry about all that. The other girls will arrive tomorrow." And I was left at boarding school. And I was in my mind, I was thinking, Enid Blyton, Mallory Towers. This is going to be great. There's going to be other girls, I'm thinking. But then I think, as I went up the little crickety stairs, I was thinking, yikes, I'm definitely going to be different here. And I think I went to bed, and I obviously did my rocking there quite profusely, if I remember correctly. Thinking, oh my goodness, I left the door a little open, everything. But anyway, in a nutshell, that was how I went to boarding school at age 9. And therefore, how did I really survive anything? I was left at boarding school, and I was the only child that cried at the end of term, because I'm thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to go back home. All the other girls cried at the beginning of term, and I didn't. But basically, again, back to the things, it was an escape. And I think it slowly dawned on me. I think at the very beginning, I invented everything. I was probably the queen of Princess India, or whatever it was, because obviously I had exotic skin again, lots of more white people and everything. But I think then I went from saying nothing and rocking, but I then realized very quickly, I'm realizing that actually I'm now in a different place, and almost the slate becomes clean. And I first of all started inventing, and I was some Indian princess, because I had people coming from all parts of the world I never even heard of. And when these trunks arrived, I mean, these trunks were almost glittered with gold to me. But then obviously I had the clergy orphan list, which was the uniform and the basic things. But obviously the church took care of that, which is why my mum didn't have to do anything. And basically my mum had got rid of me because by sending me here, it was all paid for. She didn't have to give me any food. She didn't have to look after me. Didn't have to buy me any uniform. And I only had to appear in the holiday. And if she wrote a letter, which she did often, then I was allowed to stay there in the holiday too. So that's really how I lived. But again, boarding school was my escape, my first escape, because slowly I realized actually it doesn't matter what color you are, where you come from, what your mum is, whether your pants fall down because they don't fit. Actually, when we were all there in the dormitories, we were actually all equal. We were all innocent little girls, for different reasons being sent there. Some obviously for far more positive reasons than mine, and mostly it was people in the forces. Their parents were moving around a lot, and they wanted their child to have a good education. Obviously, they were quite well off, but I think it taught me again patience. Just it will work itself out. But I made friends for life. In fact, I went away last weekend with the same friends I made at age 9 and 10. And it taught me probably not to be jealous or compare. You know, I did start early on being very jealous when these trunks were arriving, you know, with these beautiful clothes and gowns and all the rest of it, you know. But actually, oddly, they didn't notice. They didn't care about that. We didn't really compare family lives at all. But again, back to that sort of what do you learn at the time? And there was some lovely little moments when I learned actually that there was humanity. I mean, one of my best friends, her birthday's the day before me. And my biggest worry was, oh my God, it's going to be my birthday. All the parents sent in money and cakes and presents for all the children. You can invite 10 children. And obviously my mother never visited the school and never only wrote to the headmistress, who was the woman I met actually on that first day, and never sent any money because she just presumed the clergy orphan would pay for it. And I was worried about my birthday party because obviously at school you want friends. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've got no friends. What on earth am I going to do for the party? But this friend of mine said, well, my birthday's the day before. Let's just have a joint party. My mum and dad will send a cake. We'll have a little, what theme are you having? I'm thinking, theme? I've never had a cake. I've never had a birthday cake, let alone a theme. So there I was, you know, making friends, having birthday cakes with a roof over my head, with some warmth. And I stayed there until I was 16, hardly going home, really, kind of living a dual life, going back home, obviously, when I did have to go home. But I had really, I mean, in the meantime, actually, my mum moved house without telling me, which was interesting. But I also almost plotted and planned that I would never really go back home. I'd seen a better world. And I think that's really what opened my eyes. And I kind of was lucky in some way because I got a good education, made friends for life. And back to the patience. I did think, well, no, if I can manage this. And again, it was patience, thinking, well, I'm going to be here till at least 16. I'm going to have to be patient. And you have a choice. You know, you're going to make the best of it or you're going to moan and whinge. And I think those themes came back again. And I've got some treasured memories there. You know, there's women from all, it was a girls' boarding school, women from all different backgrounds. And it just shows you actually when you learn almost to forget your past and not talk, I didn't talk about it too much. Actually, you're all equal. We're all worrying about similar things and we're all looking towards the future in slightly different ways. And the future will be different. But actually, it taught me, you know, that being different doesn't really matter. And I think it was the first time in my life I thought being different actually was okay. And the nicest thing is, you know, people started, when I stopped inventing the Indian princess from New Delhi and all the rest of it, I think people started liking me for me. And I'd never had that. I'd never really had a friend, remember. And I didn't need a birthday cake to have friends. And I think it just taught me that people would choose me. And I played netball and I became the captain. I was like, oh my goodness. And I think because I was so skinny, I was quite good at sport. But, you know, I wanted to be good at everything. I wanted to be liked, obviously. But people started liking me for who I was. And I'd never had that. So I started liking me. And really that was the beginning of going into my early adult years. You know, I'd say beginning of the change and the accepting. It was actually, you know, you can carry on being that victim of an adoption, but slowly I was beginning to realize, you know, some people were actually quite interested in it and were quite intrigued, which I'd never had. And then, oh, lucky you've got two mums. Are you going to find your other mum? And I'd never really thought about any of these things. But slowly then, you know, at 16, I then made a decision and left boarding school. Some people stayed on for A-levels and went on to uni. But I mean, sadly, my mum was beside herself because she needed me to go home and earn some money, in fact. And she was still obviously a drunk, still lying on the floor in a different house. But I did go back only for a year. But I was a stronger... I never retaliated to my mum, because to this day I am actually eternally grateful because, you know, she had a dreadful life, really. But I did go home and did what I needed to do. And also I left home for good at age 17. But it was those beginnings of the boarding school setting some different foundations for me and taught me as an early adult and a later teen, actually, you know, you do have your life ahead of you. So are you going to keep looking back over your shoulder and inventing stories and being that victim? Or are you now going to think, right, you know, it's up to me a little here. So yes, so that's where we are now. I'm just aware of the time, how we are for time.
Yeah, we might have to have a part 2, Carol. It sounds to me like boarding school was actually a positive experience
Oh
for
yes,
you,
yes.
and
I mean,
that's really, really good to hear. That actually your mum really helped you out by taking you on that journey, and in it, this excitement that I heard as you're watching the train and watching, really noticing people have got makeup on and intricate details, that actually was the beginning of a new kind of chapter for you in your life. And I kind of just want to wonder how Daniel was looked after when when you weren't there to look after him.
well, that's an odd one actually, but strangely, don't forget Daniel was my mother's birth child and the baby. So my mother, and this was a difficult one, and Daniel and I are very close to this day, but my mother doted on him. So when
Oh, well,
I,
that's
so I mean, and, you know, Daniel was fine. I mean, he obviously has his issues now, but you know,
don't we all?
but no. The good thing is when I wasn't there, from what I understand, my mum had to step up to the plate because I wasn't there doing the chores, so that helped. And in fact, the lovely thing is he was oblivious to most of the things I've talked about today because he's 4 years younger than me. Yeah, and he always, and mum, you know, his mum, I'd have to say, but mum loved him. She cuddled him. She did all the things she didn't do to be. I mean, it was difficult for me, and Daniel and I have talked about this a lot because, you know, he didn't notice that I maybe got, you know, a slither of cake and he got a quarter of the cake, or even more realistic, he got a dinner and I got maybe, you know, I don't know, a crumpet or something, you know. But I guess that's the thing, you know, you are wrapped up in your own thing. But no, Daniel definitely, yeah, and I partly feel good, but I partly feel bad because in the holidays when I did go back, probably to about age, I think, I can't remember, maybe 11. I've been at boarding school a couple of years, and I used to have to look after Daniel in the holiday, and we used to go down to the sea. That was my kind of haven where we lived. And one day, you know, he said, "What's this boarding school place like?" He said, and I think by then he's going to a school. Mum was making sure he's getting to school, and Mum actually was a bit better then. You know, she was getting some help. I think my brothers and sisters had noticed some things, but she'd moved to a different area. She was a little happier, and she was still getting drunk, but she never touched Daniel. She never abused him in any way, in any shape or form, which I am pleased at. And he was relatively big. But anyway, I think when he must have been maybe 7 or something, you know, I said to him about boarding schools. He kept saying, "Where are you going, Lottie?" You know, and I obviously explained it. And my only regret, I don't know if I oversold it, because I guess, again, my perspective was very different because I was getting away from mum. And it's very different getting away from an abusive mother and an abusive life to a loving mum, from a loving mum and a loving life. Anyway,
Yeah.
he did go to a boarding school, and in fact, he went to the brothers' school for boys of my boarding school. But he didn't.
Right.
But because his, you know, he missed mum, he loved mum, mum loved him, so he had a very different experience. And a boys' boarding school is very different to a girls'. But he did go to boarding school. He did get an education. Perhaps he didn't make the most of it. But yes, little Daniel was okay, and he was looked after, and he did get a good education. So yes, Danny was all right. And in fact, my older brothers and sisters, and my older brother by then was getting married. My other sister was finishing nursing college. My other sister had got married as well. And then actually the difficult one was my next sister. And we always had a difficult relationship, but only because she was a certain age and she was doing a GCSEs, I think O-levels, whatever at the time. And I think when my dad had died, she also kind of, no one really noticed her, or so she felt. So it was interesting again that, you know, even though she was the mother, the daughter biological, because of the time and in their lives that dad had died, it impacted all of us very differently.
Yeah, of course. Well, you have given us a lot of food for thought about how to survive and also then thrive. What I think I'd really like to do, Lottie, is actually bring you on for a second time so
Oh my
we can
goodness.
learn about how you have learned to thrive. Now we've learned all about your younger years and kind of what molded you into this bigger thinking, this bigger picture thinking, and all this resilience. And the tolerance that you learned, and actually how you have started to change your life around. And perhaps we could do a part 2.
Oh my goodness! Well, if you want, I think people might have had enough of me, but that was.
We want to know what happened next.
Okay, yes, no, I hadn't realised that it took so long to explain, because I haven't really talked about it in this depth for a long time, to be honest. So it kind of brings back some emotions. But yes, there is a part 2, and it's not quite so gloomy, I promise you. Okay.
Yeah, we're honoured that you have gone, that you've been able to go into such depths, because I'm sure that it's been quite painful. And like, I did hear you say that you hadn't spoken about that in that depth. And so, yes, thank you, honestly, for being so vulnerable and honest about how you've got to this point, or to these early years. So just as we've got a few minutes left, so we could just leave our listeners on a kind of cliffhanger.
Oh, not a positive note then, no.
Wow, you could, whatever, your cliffhanger can be positive, it can be what's the a bit like what's the next, what are we going to see, what we're going to hear from you next?
I don't really know. Well, I guess I mean hopefully we've set the scene really, and I didn't realize how dark it was actually, because I have blocked it. So I guess part 2 is learning, I think. I mean, my title is Letting Go. So you've heard the beginnings of that. But no, the cliffhanger is sadly, both my mothers, so the clue is I did find the other one, both died more or less in the same year. So I went to 2 funerals in the same year. So there's a whole raft of things going on there, which was a bit of a challenge. And then hopefully the reason we're here is actually piecing all those bits of the puzzle together that actually ends up being me at 58. And, and like yourself, I say thank you to you for giving us the opportunity, because I think as an adoptee, we all feel that we use that word abandoned and trauma. And I kind of hear all these really negative words. And I know my story has been a little negative, but obviously it is very real, and it's not meant to be negative. But I hope my story is, and I think that's the thing I've learned when I didn't talk about it for years. Boarding school started opening my eyes a little, but I think by sharing is okay, because actually it bonds us, and it's not a competition about who's had the worst adoption or even the best. And even if you've had a loving family, there's underlying things going on. So I mean, part 2 is more about taking that vulnerable, quite innocent little Lottie, who's now got some building blocks, but she does get not thrown. I mean, obviously I make these choices myself, but there are some things about finding my birth mother, having dreams of being the Indian princess. Still, they still stay with me even today. And then how I kind of moved on and kind of went from not feeling safe to making myself very safe, but then having to escape again. So my whole theme is kind of escaping. But at the end, I'm sitting here today because I do escape, and I find the real me, which is nice.
And that's really what life is about, isn't it? We spend so much time putting on these masks and reinventing ourselves and wanting to be liked and fitting ourselves into small pieces. But actually, if we could just find the true us, the truest expression of us, and delve with it into the shadows to find the light, then how amazing would that be?
And it's believing that you can do it. So, I mean, I mentioned the cold bunker. I mean, in those darkest moments, and we've all got dark moments. You don't have to have a cold bunker. I'm aware of that. And even if you're sitting in a wonderful family, a wonderful marriage, whatever, we still have dark moments. And I think, that's okay. But I think, just remember what you're learning. I think I have learned that actually I was learning without realizing, I'd learned. So when we had lockdown, to finish it off, I loved lockdown. I was fully prepared for lockdown. Tell me to stay indoors. I was very lucky. I was in a sunny country. Tell me to stay home and watch Netflix and keep fit and cook. Hey, great. I wasn't locked down in a cold bunker this time in the cold and no food. So I think it's been great for, and I don't want that word overused. living in Britain, we were very lucky. In fact, I had been to India, which is part of the story. You know, coming from India at the beginning of lockdown, you know, I think I've always learned now, in whatever moment, even just be grateful for waking up and breathing. But there's a lot more we can be grateful for. So yes, I think here we are. So I look forward to, I didn't know we were having a part 2, but yes, I look forward to sharing a more positive part 2 with people.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute treat for us to listen to you and hear your story, and I can't wait for part 2 of letting it go and letting go. And so watch out, listeners, we will be having a part 2 with Lottie. Bye for now.